Beach Town, George, a short story written by Omar Zahid. As he drove his rusty brown 1994 Chevrolet through Beach Town, George could not help but feel the silence that lurked within the bones of the small village. It was as though every single building, tree, person, and animal waited with bated breath for an unprecedented event. But nothing was ever going to happen. George knew this. Just as he felt, with every fiber of his being, that he would leave this world without even so much as a whisper in his life. The gurgling chortle of his engine shattered the stillness in the streets as he drove along. Some of the villagers turned to look at the invader, their faces as calm and characteristic as the Lake Michigan on a peaceful day. But their eyes carried an ethereal aura. George felt the questioning in their eyes, the uncertainty. It was as harsh as the rays of the setting sun, filtering in through the windshield and stabbing at his eyes. He pulled the sun visor down and eased his foot into the gas. A group of turkeys hollered and scattered as George's Chevrolet drove them from the entrance to his farmhouse. He put the truck to a stop right in front and stepped out quietly. George was not what most would call a striking man. He was 5'5", had a bald crown, and a type of solemn sadness that sat on his wrinkled skin. Every step he took, every gesture, seemed to come from a place of defeat. The most illustrious moments of his life had been the 45 years he spent in the police force. Now he would retire and he would sunk deep into oblivion, so much so that he couldn't recognize himself sometimes. He walked over to the other side of the truck, a slight limp in his gait, and brought out the bags of fish he'd bought from the market. As he walked inside, he was hit by a sudden gust of wind, almost as if an unseen force had spat a projectile of air at him. George spun around immediately, his knuckles white to the bone, as he clutched the bags of fish tightly. There was a howl in the air as the wind combed through the land. George stared around, half in fright and half in surprise. Then he turned, walked inside, and shut the door behind him. He did not see the drift of sand growing at the foot of his door until it turned into the form of a hooded figure. Just as quickly as it formed, the figure of dust degenerated and flew out with the wind. Later that night, George sat in front of his TV watching the news as the anchor predicted a hurricane in some part of Illinois. The anchor was a young man who dazzled in a shiny brown two-piece slicked hair and a confident smile. You just wait, George thought. You'll become like me soon enough. The world will forget you and all your service, and it will be like you never existed. Yeah. He cut some boiled fish with his knife, stuck it in his mouth, and chewed. George could not tell how long it had gone on for, but slowly it dawned on him, the tapping sound on the window. It was like a knock, only lighter. George stared wide-eyed as he listened to the tapping. It went 1, 2, 3, stopped, then continued again. He turned around and stared at the curtain. It undulated as the wind from the outside beat on it, but the rhythm of the tapping on the window did not match the velocity of the wind. George gulped noisily. Then he reached for the marlin 336C lying against the couch, cocked it, and aimed it straight at the window as he approached. The undulations on the curtain increased until it felt like it was shivering from a cold. George's heart raced, and he felt the air in the room tighten until it was hard to breathe. A howl began to grow behind the curtains as they writhed around. George stretched an arm tentatively while the other held the gun. In a temporary flare of courage, he swiped the curtain aside, yelling and ready to fire. But he was met with nothing. Nothing at all, but an endless sprawl of night and very bad weather. His face was a mask of pure relief, as his palpitating heart slowed. He stared out into the night. Flashes of lightning broke out intermittently from underneath thick pillows of furious clouds, breaking the hold of darkness on the land. But it was only momentarily, and after that bright spike, darkness would cover the entire place again. All this bad weather, George muttered before pulling his head back in. He shut the window, then shut all other windows, keeping the fury of the wind outside. The broadcast on the TV was breaking up now, but George could still make out a couple of words from the anchor, like "please, indoors, hurricane, largest." George trudged over to the TV and pulled the plug. No one's stupid enough to go out in this kind of weather anyways, he thought out loud. He finished up his dinner, took the plates out and went to bed. "Hello!" George yelled. "Is anyone out there?" He got no response. Nothing but the shriek of the wind. He held up his arm as he tried to keep the revolving pillar of sand from entering his narrowed eyes. I could swear I'd seen someone right in the storm, he thought. He turned around, trying to make sense of his surroundings, but it looked like he was trapped within a giant castle of flowing sand. Suddenly, George stifled. He thought he'd heard someone call his name from within the storm. "Is someone there?" he called out again. "Stop playing games with me. I'm an ex-cop, trust me. I'm not someone you want to be messing with." George stared into the storm for a while, but he got nothing. It was just a storm. Suddenly, everything stopped. It was all quiet, like all the sound had been sucked from the world. George turned and almost bumped into a face in the storm. "Jesus Christ!" George screamed as he blanched. His skin turned white as he stared, horrified, at the grinning face made of sand. "Hello, George. Nice to meet you." Who? George's lips quivered as he tried to speak. "Who am I?" the face asked. It detached itself from the wall of sand, floating momentarily. A stream of sand flowed from the wall, attaching itself to the face, forming a definite shape, until a tall man in a long cloak stood right in front of George. "Oh God, where am I?" George asked, stupefied. "Guess," the man said. "Where are you?" "I am dead, right? This is the afterlife, isn't it?" "No, George, you are only dreaming." George sighed audibly. The relief he felt was tremendous. "I'm going to wake up soon," he thought. "It's laughable." "What is it?" George asked. "The relief on your face. You think this is a figment of imagination, but it isn't." "What is it then?" "A reunion. The continuation of where we left off years ago." "Where? What? What reunion?" "You'll know soon enough." Wait. George's eyes flipped open and he sat up with an audible gasp. He looked around, searching for the stranger in his dreams, but he was confronted by the familiarity of his room. His shoulders dropped as he bowed his head, relieved that he would finally woken up. "That was weird," he said out loud. He shook his head, got out of bed, and got into the bathroom. He splashed some water on his face and stared into the mirror. "Oh, you are an old man, George," he said. "An old man struggling with the fact his life is coming to a close." After a while of staring, he shook his head and left for the living room. George knew something was wrong the moment he felt the cold, wet air on his face. He looked up and saw leaves, dirt, and broken branches strewn across the living room. The door was wide open. "What the hell?" George frowned as he stepped closer. He was growing old, but he could remember clearly that the door had been firmly shut. George flung his eyes around, trying to check if this was a break-in. His hunting rifle was still there. The rest of his stuff too. He walked out onto the porch and looked at the last spot he would park his truck. It was still there. This was no break-in. It was no break-in at all. He stretched his eyes farther out into the open. It looked like giants had staged a heated fight through the entire place. Trees had been uprooted. The sturdier ones had their branches snapped. The grasses were matted hard against the ground. The storm hadn't even spared the barn. There were holes on its roof from where sheets of zinc had been ripped off. George turned and walked back in, wondering when the disaster the weather has wreaked would be fixed. Suddenly his eyes fell on a package sitting right beside the couch. He hadn't seen it when he walked out, because it was facing the door. He narrowed his eyes, and the wrinkles on his face deepened. The package, whatever it was, wasn't there last night. He looked around the room again, more cautiously this time. It was as if he was expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Surprise!" He stepped closer, getting a good look at the box. Whoa, it was a metal detector. More wrinkles grew on George's face. Why would anyone drop off a metal detector in his living room? It was then that he saw it. Sprinkles of dust on the package. But they weren't just sprinkles, George realized with a start. They were words. "Open up, Georgie." He looked around. Is this a prank? He thought. It had to be. He got down on his knees and unboxed the metal detector. It was brand new. The leaves in the living room rustled as a slow breeze floated in through the open door. George turned around and pulled his head back instantly. He thought the leaves were moving quite unnaturally until his eyes widened. They had just formed new words. "The bag! Now!" George was many things. Confused, frightened, nervous. But he was a cop, and that desire to always follow things up was not something he could shake off in a blink. Holding the metal detector, he went out to the back of the house. The hurricane had not sparred it either, and there were loose clumps of soil from where shrubs had been ripped out. The metal detector beeped as it came to life, and George flinched, nearly dropping it. He stared at the device, confusion swimming in his eyes. He hadn't put it on. But he had not been doing anything himself since morning either. He stared at the metal detector again. It went off. Then it came on. George stared at it, convinced it was broken as it repeated the same on and off motion. But then he took a step, and it steadied. He paused, his eyes distant, as thoughts rolled through his mind. He knew what he had to do now. He held the detector close to the ground, and he moved forward. George was nearing the end of the yard when the detector beeped excitedly. It had picked up something. His eyes narrowed as he peered at the spot. There was something there, a raised patch of earth. No! He stepped closer. There was more. He swiped the earth off with his hand, revealing a rusted metal box. He cocked his brow. Immediately, he let the detector go. He got to his knees and used his fingers to free the box from the soil around it. Freeing the box was easier than George had thought, though his shoulders heaved when he was done. He lifted the box and cocked his brow. It was surprisingly light. Thankfully, the lid was not locked. George placed it on the ground and opened it. The excitement drained from his face instantly and was replaced with a profound disappointment. A neatly folded orange handkerchief sat in the middle of the box. George didn't know how long it had been buried, but for the few spots of rust on it, the handkerchief looked to be in perfect condition. George stuck his hand in and picked the handkerchief. The longer he stared at it, the deeper he frowned. There was something acutely familiar about it, and then from out of the blue, it hit him. A memory so distant, it could have as well been in monochrome colors. He saw a girl giggling and running around the house with her new possession, an orange-colored handkerchief a gypsy gifted her. That was his sister. A week later, she will disappear without a trace and never be found again. George got to his feet, holding the handkerchief like a piece of evidence. What was it doing here? After decades. Suddenly, George winced as his head was filled with a rush of voices. His hand involuntarily formed a fist around the handkerchief, and the voices climbed, shattering the sanctity of his mind like an invasion. He groaned as he staggered and fell on his knees. He balled his fists until his knuckles turned white. The voice reached a crescendo, and then they stopped abruptly. George's groaning and grimace stopped in like manner. He got to his feet with tight fists and a face drained entirely of emotion. His eyes looked distant, lost. He walked into the house, out the front door, and made his way towards the Lake Michigan. That was the last anyone ever saw or heard from George. People would talk about him afterwards. They would find a metal detector lying in his backyard, as well as a rusted box and the hole he would free it from. The story was told that George had found gold and fled with it so no one would disturb him. He would come into Beach Town to leave the world quietly. He did leave quietly, but he left a tale on the tongues of villagers, and anyone who came in would hear of the tale of Beach Town George.